when I started seeing my friends who had become teachers smoke weed, I was like, wait a second. This can't be that bad. All my teachers are smoking weed and I had no clue. Hey there, and welcome to the Hazy Pod, a new podcast for the high-minded and the cannacurious. I'm Jessica.
I'm Meg.
And I'm Nick. We'll be taking you with us as we learn about all things cannabis. No prior stoner experience needed.
Get ready to explore this magical plant with us every week on the Hazy Pod.
So light up a joint or pop a gummy and let's get hazy.
Welcome to Hazy Pod. We're excited you're here for our first episode. Let's start with how we met and why we're here.
Yes. Meg, you kind of brought us all together. Do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So I know Nick and Jess separately from separate areas of life, but we're all creatives, and I knew that they would get along. Nick and I know each other from back when we both lived in Guatemala, and Jess and I have known each other in the creative space in Salt Lake City where we live. And so I always thought it'd be fun to have a business with friends or a podcast with friends, and we all fell in love with weed around the same time and decided to go for it together this summer while we were all unemployed girlies. I will let Jess go into her story and go.
Meg, I think we actually met through church.
Yeah.
I think.
In fact, really religious Christian.
Yeah, I think we were both on the edges of like leaving the religion we grew up in. We grew up in the Mormon religion, and just kind of. I feel like those people find each other like when you're both spiritually confused.
Yeah.
And then my interest in cannabis really was part health, part recreational. And because growing up like super religious, it was just always something that was never an option until I left. And then I was like, oh, weed is an option? Let's see what that's all about. And then just discovered a lot of healing and through it. So yeah, Nick, I'm glad Meg has brought us together.
Yeah, it has been so awesome getting to know you, Jess. And like she said, I knew we were going to hit it off. I'm just pumped that we can all do this and that we all found each other at this like perfect intersection of life. The unemployment has probably been hard for all of us in different ways, but I think it leaves that creative space and then also that time to sort of explore and really dig into things that, you know, these projects that you don't even have the time or the energy to think about when your brain and your time and your day is full of so many other things. So yeah, like Meg said, we met in Guatemala probably, oh my goodness, 6 years ago already, in Panajachel, around Lake Atitlan, which is such a magical place. And I just think, we had no idea the sort of friendship we might forge and the journey it would take us on. So I'm just super excited to dig into this with you all.
Yeah. Nick, do you want to tell us how you got into weed and like what your first experiences with cannabis looked like?
You know, I feel like I'm just a lover of all things natural and plants. And quite honestly, like, I don't know if I have a prolific moment ingrained in my mind as like a first big experience. For me, it's like more of a blur of hotboxing on back roads with friends. Or sitting on couches watching, you know, funky movies with the lights off. But it's kind of cliche, but it's true. And I guess, you know, in current day exploration, I'd say that I just approach cannabis and use with maybe intentionality and also with hopes of always just having a better understanding for the medicinal properties and parts of the plant. So, you know, as we've all developed, probably not to speak for you two, but some really fun adult anxiety, dabbling with different strains for sleep has been really helpful. And also as a pretty active like 30-some-year-old, I've struggled with some high blood pressure and want to explore the ways to mix botanicals like hibiscus and CBD to just sort of like get that all in check.
Yeah. And just playing off of that, my first experience with cannabis that I can recall was actually when Nick and I lived in Guatemala. I was dating a certain bartender who was
my God.
And appreciate you, bud, for getting me into cannabis for the first time. Obviously, it was illegal there, and I was very nervous because having grown up Mormon, I was terrified of drug use in any form, and I thought that I would immediately be arrested, go to jail, go to hell if I dabbled in anything like that. And I had siblings and friends who got in trouble with the law in high school for using cannabis and psychedelics. And so I stayed far away from that stuff until I was probably in my mid-20s and had deconstructed my Christian background before I really started to dive into it in a medicinal way for chronic pain. And I got involved with the Utah Cannabis medical program here, and it's just changed my quality of life. I'm able to sleep without heavy-duty pain meds, and I'm able to function and do my job and sit for long periods of time without feeling like I need to just cry because of my back pain. I have scoliosis, and cannabis really helps just loosen everything up and helps me focus, helps me get creative. And yeah, it's a magical plant that I'm really excited to share with other people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Megan. You know, like alternatively, like we're not here to claim that we're experts or like, you know, how to be a stoner 101. It's obviously with intentionality and to know the risks, right? But I think what is so disappointing in modern day American society is, you know, anything taboo isn't talked about to the point that then people have to sort of like seek it out or secretly experiment with it. And, you know, because of legalization not happening until, well, just recently in Minnesota, and also, you know, still struggling with that in Utah where you girlies are, it's like people don't always have incredible experiences and are maybe afraid to talk about their experiences, you know. And it hasn't always been incredible, but it's been a journey. Like, you know, I've turned into a cicada after accidentally eating 2 potent Delta 8 cookies, thinking they were my partner's mom's ginger snap. But you know, that's definitely a story for a different episode. So
it makes me sad when I hear people be like, oh, I tried it and it was awful. I had like the worst experience, because a lot of there's just so much more to weed than just being like, here, take this brownie, or here, take this gummy, which is usually kind of how people get into it out here in Utah, just because it looks safer than smoking. It's more accessible than smoking. So you'll see people out here get like really curious, and then they'll take an edible and have no clue what's in it. They'll have no clue what strain it is, how much is in there. And so then they have a bad experience, and then they just kind of see it as, you know, something untouchable that, you know, they don't want to kind of go back to. And yeah, I'm glad we're doing this, because there's just so much that goes into cannabis science wise that I think we're all still learning about, but would be exciting to kind of have some experts on the show that are more expert than us. Kind of share their knowledge with us.
Throughout this podcast, we're hoping to talk to experts in cannabis science, bud tenders, people who've had experience with using it for indigenous purposes and spirituality, and really get into all the different facets of cannabis.
So we want to share a segment on the show. So every episode, we're going to have 2 truths and a lie. We're all familiar with that game, where we're going to break some of those cannabis stigmas. And this is going to be a softball, is that what people say? Sport analogy? Bad sport analogies. We'll do this every episode. Number 1, cannabis can reduce pain, nausea, and seizures.
And number 2, cannabis can improve sexual desire and orgasms, especially for women.
And number 3, cannabis is a gateway drug. So out of those 3, which is the lie? Obviously, it's the gateway drug. A 2023 psychological medicine study showed that there's actually no evidence to support the notion that it's a gateway.
Yeah, I feel like that was, at least religious-wise, that was something that, you know, like our religion growing up really expressed for some reason, that any drug, alcohol, coffee, like you were automatically like needed to be in rehab. Like that was kind of the picture that painted for me, at least. So yeah, when I remember when I like smoked weed for the first time, I was an adult, probably like 24, 25 at that time. And yeah, I was so scared. I was so paranoid. Like obviously like certain strains will cause you to be more paranoid, but I already had this existing belief that, you know, like if I smoke weed, like I'm not gonna be able to hold a job. Like that was the belief that I had in my head. Got to break that stigma that cannabis is a gateway drug and that it'll leave you without a job and
I especially
without your kid.
We can dive more into this on a later episode, Jess, but I'm interested to hear your take as a mother and the stigma around drug, quote unquote, usage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That'll be a good episode. Yeah. Because, there's some fun stuff around, especially in Utah.
Also, like, what a notion that you can take a whole person and just because of one thing that they do, they, like, it's such a stamp, I feel like, in many forms of religion, like, good stamp, bad stamp, right? And like all of the beautiful things in between are just entirely overlooked. Not to get too intense, but it's just kind of like a mild form of control. It's really interesting to see the similarities between how y'all grew up and what it's like in Southeast Minnesota too. I don't know. I attended a pretty strict, specific Synod of a Lutheran school. And I mean, I don't even know that my family or my parents were that religious per se, but it does just bring such a heavy cloud to making decisions based around anything that is not perceived as holy, for lack of a better word.
Something that I actually feel like has been a positive influence on how cannabis is perceived in pop culture is actually celebrities who use cannabis and are open about cannabis usage. I would love to hear from you guys. Who are your favorite celebs who, smoke or you've seen talk about weed in
I've got a lot.
public?
I mean, like, I feel like you can't get past the fact that Snoop's always going to be the real MVP in this topic. Like, there's really just no up or down from there. That is the precedent.
I've heard that Snoop's roller makes like $70K, which that's a dream job for me personally. If I ever learn how to roll a joint.
I was about to say, wait, I would actually suck at that because I suck at rolling, but yeah. For me, it's always been Rihanna. God bless Rihanna. Especially like as a mom, I'm like, great. Like honestly, like icon of mothers, icon of smokers. Lil Wayne's kind of always up there for me too.
I would say my favorite that comes to mind is Casey Musgraves. She's had a lot of different forms of weed iconography in her music and her shows. She posts photos on social media for smoking joints, and I just love how open she is about it. She's clearly very successful, and that doesn't impede her work in any way. Seeing these people who are very successful, I think, in pop culture, consuming cannabis and using it to enhance their lives, I think does a good job of breaking down the stigma that it's just dudes in their basement.
Yeah, I'm
eat out of a pop can,
When I started seeing my friends who had become teachers smoke weed, I was like, wait a second. This can't be that bad. I didn't like
Also, like,
probably all my teachers are smoking weed and I had no clue.
I mean, being in a room full of kids all day long just seems like an inevitable, combo that's how you would end your day. Like, I wouldn't expect anything less of teachers.
I think also as Americans kind of shift their viewpoint to kind of realize that alcohol is maybe not as safe as everyone thought it was, a lot of people are smoking more than they're drinking. And I've actually seen studies that Americans perceive weed as more healthy than alcohol, which I think is really interesting.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up because this is not a product placement thing. This is our first episode. We do not have any product placement.
Do you want to sponsor
going on?
No.
But I started wearing this Whoop band a couple months ago, and it tracks my recovery. So your recovery is based on your heart rate variability. It's basically saying, like, when you're sleeping, are you resting and digesting, or are you still in fight mode? It asks me a certain amount of questions every day, and it tracks and kind of parallels those. And so it'll ask me if I smoked or consumed marijuana, or if I had alcohol, how many drinks did I have at what time. And every time that I've drank, my recovery the next day has always been at least 20% lower than my normal days. So my body is not healing. I just started tracking it enough for it to see the trend with cannabis. And my recovery is up 4% every time, on average, every time that I'm consuming cannabis. So it's that science is wild. I think we've known that for a long time, honestly. I think doctors and, capitalists have known this for a while, but no one wanted to share it because how it would affect the economy.
And alcohol is so ingrained in American culture and socializing, and you hardly can go anywhere outside your home and interact with other adults and not have alcohol there. So it takes a lot of conscious effort to choose to consume something other than cannabis or not consume anything at all.
Yes. I also want to be very clear that I also consume alcohol.
Yeah.
Definitely still drink.
Just fine.
The difference between the drinking in your 30s, though, y'all, that hits different, and I cannot hang. I'm like, one high quality cocktail, please, and that's about it for me. We can literally slowly and legally poison ourselves with alcohol in the United States of America, but a medicinal plant is still considered so naughty and so taboo.
Yeah. And we find those contradictions everywhere in our about.
Absolutely.
Actually, interestingly, cannabis smoking now outpaces cigarettes for American adults. I think even even 10 or 15 years ago, we would not have seen anything like that. And
Yeah.
I think as people realize how dangerous smoking and vaping is, they might choose to turn to other forms of relaxation. So it'll be interesting to see as the trend continues over time or changes, what that looks like as Gen Z gets older and decides to drink or not drink or use cannabis or not.
And the more accessible it becomes, right? Like
Exactly.
the moment it gets federally legalized, like there'll be a lot of really interesting data to look at when it comes to tons of different things. Health, life longevity, crime. That's something that a lot of people like to use to fight against, the
war on drugs,
cannabis everywhere.
I mean, I can't imagine anything less appealing to me when I'm high than going out to do crimes. Like all I want to know.
So funny to me.
We want to answer some listener questions and share funny or successful stories that you all have when it comes to the cannacurious experiences in your life. Obviously, since this is the first episode, we don't have any of your questions yet, but we hope to have them in our inboxes soon.
Nick, I would love for you to share your cicada story.
Yeah.
Into it.
Shout out to my partner and shout out to his mother. It's really interesting. I don't know. They're probably going to laugh so hard if they listen to this, which I kind of hope they don't, but it'll be funny if they do. So yeah, it was a beautiful summer day in Chicago. I think it was last summer, maybe 2 summers ago. And we were about ready to go for a long bike ride. And I went over to my partner's place after work, was snacking on some lovely little cookies that were on the counter. I was very convinced that they were his mother's famous homemade beautiful little ginger snap cookies, and indeed they were not. They were very high potency. I don't even want to throw out a number here because I don't remember, but like I want to say 30 to 60 milligrams.
Oh my God.
Up to 8 per cookie.
So much.
My gals. So I have consumed one whole cookie by the time my partner realizes what's going on. And I have the second half of the second one in my mouth. And I could just tell by the look on his face that it was not his mother's cookies and that something was wrong. So he was like, he was like, babe, what are you doing? And I was like, what do you mean? I thought these were your mom's. And he was like, no, they are not. I got them from the store earlier. And I was like, okay, why the fuck are they in a Tupperware container already? And then where's the packaging? And so, composed ourselves. And I was like, all right, what are we talking about here? Like, what's the potency? Do I need to spit them out? Do I make myself puke right now? What are we working with? And I don't want to shit on him at any point of the story because we've had so many discussions about how ridiculous this all was and like a little bit of a mental setback for me. But I was like, so what are we talking about? And he goes, I think it should be okay. I took one like an hour ago and I don't feel anything, so you should be fine. I was like, okay, I gotta just ride this one out. I'm gonna have to obviously no bike ride happened. I would have hit or been hit. I would have hit something, someone would have hit me. So I just laid on his bed and stared at the ceiling, and it was a nice hot summer day. So I just remember my body felt as though it was buzzing with the air conditioner and the cicadas outside. I think I probably fought off a series of 20 mini panic attacks that I could literally feel coming up from my toes up to my chest, There was I remember an episode of The Good Place that Lalo tried to put on to distract me, and it was helping at first, but somewhere between flying cows and I don't even remember what goes, it wasn't helping. So I think this was the only thing that could get me down from that ride.
Yeah, we should do an episode on what do you do when that happens? Because it's gonna happen to you eventually.
It happens to everybody.
It happens to everyone.
We all have stories of bad trips.
To say a tip now, so that we're not leaving you empty-handed, CBD will cut down on a lot of those hallucinogenic effects or those heady effects and bring it down and sleep.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah,
if you take some CBD and it can knock you out, great, just go to sleep and you'll feel better when you wake up. And always remember that it's not going to last forever. I know when I've had a bad trip, I think I'm always going to feel like this. It's never going to end. And in a couple hours, you're going to feel better. So hang in there, and we'll be giving you more tips on how to make sure that you're avoiding those situations.
Yeah.
It happens.
Yeah. And I think people also think like, okay, something becomes more mainstream, it becomes more extreme, and people are going to use it to like the max. And it's like, no, that's not always the case. We are going to talk through these things so that you're actually educated on what might happen, right? Because honestly, that was my first experience with Delta 8. And I was like, all right, in a brief, like before this shit hits me, before this cookie sets in, I need to know all the things. I need to know like crunch time. I'm not the best way to learn about it, but that's why the more that we talk about these things and the more we connect about them and can be open and honest, the more that we, next time can make a more educated decision on dosage, etc., product,
Exactly. And how old your product is can also make a difference. So I had some gummies in my cupboard that were probably 6 months old, and I popped one thinking it would be fine. And I had a really bad trip. And as an experienced smoker, it doesn't really happen to me all that much anymore because my body is really used to it. But, occasionally things happen. And I started thinking about DNA too hard and got really freaked out about all of the molecules in my body. And I thought I was going to have to ask my partner to take me to the hospital because I was having a panic attack. So, but I took some CBD and went to sleep. Yeah, and CBD. That helped a lot. So.
Yeah, and push water. I feel like always pushing water helps.
Drink a lot of water.
Yeah.
Exactly. And see if you can distract yourself by watching a movie or something that calms you down and helps you feel more comfortable.
Yeah. I actually didn't know that. I didn't know that obviously there's an expiration date.
Right.
There's expiration dates on everything. But like my mascara is probably 6 years old. So like I don't pay attention to that.
You should not be having a 6-year-old mascara.
Okay, maybe not 6 years old, but it's probably too old, It's something that you don't think, like I didn't ever think about that with makeup. Now I'm like, oh shit, maybe I need to like look at the date on my gummy.
I've just heard it go either way. Like if it sits there, like, what are we talking like this ages like a fine wine and it's going to be awesome or even more potent, or like, are we talking this is going to fuck my life up?
Yeah. And I'm interested in from experts on how different strains and types of cannabis and different cannabinoids age.
My favorite is when you get a pack of gummies and you leave them in the car and they melt together.
It's one,
and then it's just a 1 ounce gummy, and you're like, I want to guess what one bite.
Yeah,
what it's gonna be.
It ends up being 80 milligrams.
Nibble, nibble, nibble.
Yeah. So check your dosage. Just the
yeah. Thinking about a story that Meg was actually with me on. It was a bunch of girlies from Salt Lake. We were going to Vegas. We all took some gummies, and I was on a Marvel kick. I was binge watching all the Marvel movies, and we're in the Uber, and I'm like, guys, I feel like Doctor Strange. Like I felt like I was controlling time.
Jess, how do you know that you weren't controlling time though?
Maybe you were.
Honestly, like here's the thing. I think like those thoughts that I was having were coming from somewhere. They weren't just me like making nonsense.
Tripping,
Yeah, I wasn't just tripping. And then there was also a time where there's probably been only one really bad, like anxious time. I think, Meg, you weren't with me. I called you to pick me up. That's what it was. I called Meg to pick me up because I had smoked someone else's weed. And again, this is, like we said, this is why we're doing this, because we want people to be a lot more educated about their consumption. So I smoked someone else's weed, not knowing what strain it was and not really knowing what my like relationship was with weed yet. So I didn't know that I was not good with sativas. Like sativas just gave me so much anxiety. So I smoked hers. It was a sativa, and I literally was curled up in a ball on the sidewalk. Like I was so paranoid and just like waiting for Meg to come pick me up. Like, Mom, pick me up from the party. But like looking back at that now too, I'm like, that also taught me something, right? I learned about like how sativas affect people a certain way, and like was able to be like, oh, I think I might have anxiety because I smoke this strain, and the strain is known to like amplify anxiety. And so I would hesitate sometimes to just put like, oh, that was a bad trip, or that was awful, and maybe it was in the moment, but like I don't think that stuff comes from anywhere. So it's an opportunity. I've always looked at it as an opportunity to be like, all right, what am I supposed to be learning from this?
Yeah, I love that.
Yep.
Well, thanks for listening to our first episode of Hazy Girls. We're glad you're here. If you like this episode, please share with a friend. As it's our first episode, we want to get the word out about Hazy Gals, and we'll be bringing you more fun and educational cannabis content, hopefully a couple times a month. And please tell us what you want to learn and hear about.
Thanks, y'all.
Hazy Pod.
Talk soon. Bye, Hazy Girls.
Bye.